This is Marketing from the Front Lines, where we speak with B2B marketers who are in the trenches, bringing technology to market. Here's your host, Brett Stapper, CEO of Frontlines.io.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. Today we're speaking with Michael Chang, Director of Marketing at ArteraAI. Michael, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. Super excited for this conversation, and let's go ahead and jump right in. So we like to begin these conversations with the big question of why? Why marketing? What are you doing here?
Yeah, marketing, I think, is a really fun thing, right? Like, I went to business school, and all the stuff that you learned about, business school, right? Marketing, finance, strategy, all these things, right? Like, it's a lot of fun. Marketing tends to be a really broad subject. You touch on product, you touch on pricing, promotion, all of these different things. And then you get into the real world, and like marketing is nothing like what's sort of taught in business school. It's like a completely different beast out in real life once you're actually put it into practice. But it's the funnest part, right? Because when you think about what a lot of people are trying to do when you talk about, new innovations, new companies, startups, what have you, they're always trying to achieve product market fit. And the product side is usually pretty easy to figure out, like what's so unique about this product. But the market side is harder, like of the product market fit. And so how do you define what a market is? How do you figure out what market you should be playing in? Is this the right market? Is this the right thing I should be focused on? Like, that's all the great things about marketing that a marketer gets to be a part of. And so there's a lot of cool things that can happen. And oftentimes when you hear about the success or failures of new startups, new companies, new products, they talk about that product market fit issue. A lot of times it's not enough attention is being paid to where the marketing side sort of fell down and did not do sort of what it needed to do for that product to be successful.
When it comes to your general marketing philosophy and approach, how would you describe it or how would you summarize it?
I would say, I think this is something that a lot of marketers will definitely attest to, right? You need to be listening. You need to be listening to what your customers are telling you. You need to be listening to what your partners are telling you. You need to be listening to what your engineers and your, R&D folks are telling you, whatever it is. Big thing is about taking in all of the bits and pieces of information that's out there and figuring out how that puzzle fits together. So if you're not listening and you think you already know all the answer and you know what you want to do, you're going to, I think, struggle a lot. But if you're actively listening and you really understand all of the nuances to a lot of different things, and then sit back and take the time to then figure out how those pieces will actually fit in together and how do you actually put together a plan, a marketing plan, a go-to-market plan, go-to-market strategy, whatever it is, that's where I think you'll be successful. And so the first thing is just making sure you're actually listening. If you're not listening, then you're thinking that you have the answers to everything. I think that's going to cause you more problems than not.
So you joined Artera 9 months ago. You get through your listening phase. What comes next? What are the next big steps that you take?
Yeah, then you start putting stuff together, right? Then you start formulating a plan. And I think, once again, another thing that marketers will oftentimes do is this might also just be coming from a sort of background of science, is you start experimenting, right? You start thinking about, okay, I have a hypothesis. This is what I think the market is asking, or what my customers are looking for, or this is going to be the key messaging or the key differentiator or whatever it is. Put together your hypothesis. You think this is the answer, but you start experimenting. You do, low stakes, whether it's an email campaign or A/B testing or whatever, market research, however way you want to go about doing it, you start experimenting it. And once again, continuing to listen, getting that feedback from the customers, from the marketplace, from, all the folks that you're talking to. And when you start getting that feedback, you then start adapting the plan, right? And that's really, really important as well, too. It's not just listening and then you act. And then, you think you have all the answers. Is that continuous improvement process that you got to take into account and continue to tweak things, continue to update things. And then, hopefully, as you do so, you continue to get more results, better results, more efficient campaigns, better ROI, whatever it is are key metrics that you're looking for.
When it comes to healthcare, what makes healthcare different from maybe other industries?
So healthcare is probably one of the most screwed up industries because you have a lot of different stakeholders that you don't normally have in other industries, right? Typically, in B2C, even B2B though, like the person that you are selling to is paying for it in some way, shape, or form. is going to benefit from it, in some way, shape, or form, and is the one sort of mostly actively using it, in some shape, way, or form, right? There may be a lot of different people or what have you, but like it's technically the same person. Whereas in healthcare, one of the challenges you have is most things that you're selling, ultimately the benefit accrues to the patient, right? Hopefully you're making healthcare better for the patient at the end of the day. But the patient isn't usually the key decision maker, especially if you're talking about, pharmaceuticals or med device or whatever. It's a physician that is the person that kind of is a decision maker, is the one probably that knows the ins and outs of the product, not the ultimate beneficiary, if you will. And then you got a whole separate team that, payers that are not even involved in the system, basically deciding, does this make sense? Do I actually want to pay for it or what have you? And then that's not even to add the last piece, which is the government regulations, which I think is a hurdle that a lot of folks who don't come from a healthcare background, when they step in, they're like, what the hell is all this regulation? You can only say certain things. You're only allowed, you got to list all the side effects, right? If you're a pharmaceutical company, you can't make extravagant promises or anything else like that. You have to stick to a very circumspect indication language or what have you. And so those are a lot of challenges in healthcare and marketing that makes it much more difficult than in other fields, because, in other fields, you can just say, okay, how do I convince this end user that my service or product is good? And if I can convince them, they'll pay for it, they'll want to use it, they'll adopt it, all of that type of stuff. It's not how it works in healthcare. You need a lot of things to go right. You have to convince a lot of the people. And sometimes you have really sort of divergent interests, right? In some ways, I don't want to make this seem like doctors are only in it for the money, because they're not, but they got to make a living, right? And so if you offer them something, a service like, hey, this is going to make your patients healthier, but you as a doctor are not going to make any money off of it, are they really going to adopt it? Like, I'm not saying that they're not going to. I mean, they still want their patients to do well, but it's going to become a barrier, because they're like, wait, I don't get anything out of this, right? If I, can prescribe a better diet or a better lifestyle or whatever for my patients, and then now I never see that patient again, like, is that necessarily better for the doctor as his profession? Not really. And so that causes these sort of misaligned incentives at times. I'm not saying it always causes it, but it can. And that's what makes it more difficult when you're thinking about how to address and how do you serve your customer.
Now, going back to your history a little bit, did you have this master plan of, when you got started in this space, that you were going to stay in it? Or were you planning on just, doing it for a few years, moving to another industry, but then you fell in love?
So I come from a family of physicians, and I think that's a big part of it. I kind of grew up in the healthcare space. I remember my dad was a doctor. So I remember even when I was a little kid, after school or what have you, I would go to the hospital and sit in my dad's office or clinic and, wait for him to get done to bring me home and stuff like that. So I think I was surrounded by it at an early age. And so what may be confusing or scary to other people, right? Like, I was exposed to sick people and blood and guts at an early age, which is a little crazy, but it kind of gave me that familiarity with it that was always, it didn't shock me or surprise me. And ultimately, one of the gratifying things in healthcare was something that a lot of people also, in healthcare will ascribe to, is like, you do see the real benefits that you're helping people. Like the patients that my dad treated, how thankful they were, how appreciative they were of the service that they got, right? It saved their lives. It's not just changing their lives. And that is a very heartwarming feeling that is really hard to get anywhere else in a lot of different industries, right? Yeah, you can sell a widget or what have you that, customers love, fall in love with or what have you, but it's the impact that you can have in healthcare is just hard to replicate elsewhere.
This show is brought to you by Frontlines Media, a podcast production studio that helps B2B founders launch, manage, and grow their own podcast. Now, if you're a founder, you may be thinking, I don't have time to host a podcast. I've got a company to build. Well, that's exactly what we built our service to do. You show up and host, and we handle literally everything else. To set up a call to discuss launching your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. Now, back to today's episode. Yeah, I can imagine it's much more fulfilling than selling an e-commerce product or marketing technology like that.
Exactly.
I see that you are an AI company, or you have that in the name or in the domain. So let's talk a little bit about marketing AI. There's obviously a lot of buzz, a lot of noise. Everyone's talking about AI. How do you stand out? How do you make it clear that your AI is better and different than everything else that's on the market?
Yeah. So my philosophy on AI in general, with any kind of new disruptive technology or what have you, is when you're still referring to it as the next big thing or calling it AI or whatever, is almost like a fact that it has not figured out what it actually is supposed to do, right? Like ultimately, any new technology is supposed to do is solve problems. So when you're just talking about AI as a technology, it means that it's cool. It's, you want to learn about it. It's a novelty. It's all great. But when it shifts into, okay, this is solving the problem of cancer treatment or cancer diagnosis, or it's solving the problem of, limiting administrative burden or whatever it is that the AI is intended. When it's solving that problem and it's becoming talked about in that way, that's when it really sort of shifts. And that's when it's really actually having value, right? What impact is it actually having? So in the case of Artera, what we're doing is that we are personalizing cancer treatment. We are looking at the patient's data, leveraging big data and AI and using computer vision to look at the biopsy slides of a patient's sort of cancer biopsy. And from that, we're providing, using a lot of big data and machine learning to determine what is the risk of this patient's cancer from progressing, what types of cancer treatments are likely to be effective or helpful for this patient. And at the end of the day, that treatment decision planning is what people are buying. They're not buying the AI. If I told them they could get that treatment decision planning from some other technology, right? Throw the dice, or from, seeing something in the clouds or whatever, but it's accurate and is replicable, they'll take it. They don't care that it's AI. They just want the answers. And that's ultimately what we're doing. Is it's very cool that we're able to leverage this technology. I mean, there's no question that AI as a technology has opened up a lot of new frontiers, but you're not selling how it works. You're selling the ultimate benefit. What does it mean to the patient? What does it mean to the physician that now they get a personalized treatment plan that, they can accurately say, hey, this is going to really help my patient. It's going to give my patients better long-term outcomes. It's going to reduce the type of side effects that they face, or whatever is included in that test report that we provide. That's ultimately what they care about.
Now, given your focus on commercializing innovative tech, let's talk a little bit about that. So obviously there's a lot of technology that just dies. It never gets fully adopted, and it just sits there on the shelf, or never really goes anywhere. What do you think is the key to getting innovative technology commercialized?
So I think there's a variety of different things, right? I think the first thing, going back to my earlier statement is does it really actually solve a problem, right? There's a lot of times when people will say, have a really innovative tool, innovative technology, just because it's really cool. And they think because it's really cool, people all should adopt it, right? And ultimately it's, well, does it really solve a problem, right? And that's really the part of the marketing is like, what problem are you really solving? If you are solving a problem, then I think your likelihood of success increases by a lot. But that's not enough. Just because you're solving a problem is not sufficient, especially in healthcare. The next biggest factor is what changes do I have to make to actually adopt this thing, right? If you're saying that, hey, I can solve your problem, but you're going to have to change your whole life. You're going to have to change everything that you do. It's not going to work either, right? It doesn't matter how cool the new technology is. And so case in point, right? Tesla is not the first electric car company that's been around, right? There's been a lot of other electric car companies. So number one, they figured out how to actually make electric cars that solve problems. That doesn't present itself with a whole bunch of problems, right? The initial versions of electric cars had all sorts of issues. Couldn't drive it very far, didn't go very fast, design was bad, whatever, a lot of different reasons, right? So first and foremost, Tesla figured out exactly how do you actually make a product that people could drive on a day-to-day basis and all that kind of stuff. But they realized that no matter what, it was going to be a different environment, right? Like the way you would drive that car is different. You can't go to a gas station to fill it up. So they had to spend the time and energy to make it easy, right? They had to build out these charging stations. They had to build, these things that you could install in your garage so you can recharge your car. They had to build all of the supporting infrastructure as well to make the Tesla easy to adopt. Obviously it benefits not just Tesla, it benefits the entire electric car company and all that kind of stuff. But like, that is the real insight that you need to understand. Is like, okay, cool. We have a new technology. We can solve some problems, but how do we actually make it easy? And especially in healthcare, it's not easy to introduce new technologies, right? Doctors need to be trained. Hospitals have to get on board with it. Patients have to understand how to take some new medication or what have you. All of those things matter. And so you need to really think through, how easy is this for someone to actually start using this? And how do you make it super easy for them to actually take this on? So innovation is great, but when it's so far afield and so far different, we've all seen those cases, right? Where it's like technology that's so revolutionary that it's great, but no one can adopt it because it requires changing everything else in their lives. That's just not going to happen.
When it comes to things that annoy you, so, let's talk about limited to marketing here in med tech and digital health. What are some things that you maybe see shared around on LinkedIn that you just disagree with?
That's actually a good question.
Or you're just at ease as you scroll through LinkedIn and you just agree with all the advice you see shared?
I think so this is just in general. It's not something like specific, but I think one of my pet peeves, actually, it's not about LinkedIn, but oftentimes people, and for a good reason, I'm guilty of it as well as anybody else, right? Is you'll say, oh, we should try this new idea. We should take this thing that this other company did, or it was successful in my last company, or, I've done this in the past, and therefore we should do this new thing here. Not to say that that's good. Don't get me wrong. New ideas is always good. Taking new ideas from other places, always good. But just imitating some other, sort of putting in place something and not realizing that the context may be different and therefore you need to adapt it. So like what I mean by this is like, for example, so in health tech and med tech or what have you, there's something that's also often called referral marketing, right? You introduce some new technology or what have you, and physicians start using it, they love it. And then you say, okay, we should now start going out and not just selling to, let's say I have something that cardiologists, new drug, new procedure, whatever, that cardiologists are using. And so cardiologists get on board with it and they love it and stuff. And so oftentimes with referral marketing is you'll say, hey, let's now not just tell the cardiologist, let's go tell all the referring communities, the internal doc, the family medicine, the internal medicine docs, or what have you, the nurses, et cetera, all of the people that might be referring patients to that cardiologist. And so now we're going to tell all of these people about it and market to those people about this new thing. And then that's going to drive business back to that cardiologist. More referrals will be going to those cardiologists and they'll be ultimately using your products more, right? So sounds great. Sounds like a good idea. Makes a lot of sense, right? The problem is, let's say you're not the only person offering this type of service for cardiologists. Let's say you're one of 6 other companies that's doing pretty much the exact same things. If you go out and do referral marketing as a company, as like a sort of a Me Too product, those referrals, when they go to that cardiologist, gets diluted to these 6 other companies because they're not just using you. The referrals come and that market gets split 6 different ways. And so the ROI of that type of campaign for a sort of unique, differentiated product is going to be way higher than it is for a Me Too-like competitor or product. So it's not that the idea of doing referral marketing is a bad one. It's the fact that the context is different depending on the competitive landscape, depending on where you are as an entrant. Are you the market leader? Are you a laggard trying to get market share? What have you? Like, those are all factors that need to be considered. You can't just say, oh, well, this was a great idea. This works so well, referral marketing, and therefore every health tech company should go out and do it, or every med tech company should do it. It's like, no, you should definitely consider it. It should definitely be a tool in your tool bag, but you should be aware of when it will work and when it will not work.
This show is brought to you by the Global Talent Co., a marketing leader's best friend in these times of budget cuts and efficient growth. We help marketing leaders find, hire, vet, and manage amazing marketing talent for 50 to 70% less than their US and European counterparts. To book a free consultation, visit globaltalent.co.
I hope everyone who's considering doing Spotify Wrapped has second thoughts now. I don't know if you've seen that, but that was obviously a big hit for Spotify, but so many SaaS companies, just so many companies in general have tried to rip that off. It's painful, and it's that time of the year. I feel like those are all coming.
Yeah. And I get it, right? Like you see someone else having success with something, you're like, oh, like that makes sense. Let me go copy that, right? And probably the first person that copies it will still have some success, but it's a law of diminishing returns at some point, right? And so if everyone is doing the same thing, then it no longer is unique or differentiated. So it's just one of those things that's like, okay, like don't get me wrong. I love people sharing ideas. I love learning from other people. I'm always trying to see what other people are doing. So I don't want people to stop sharing their ideas on LinkedIn, but the people who just like, oh, let me just do exactly what someone else does. Like, okay, hold on. Let's take the time to think about this a little bit more.
Outside of yourself, who do you think is doing a really good job in med tech or digital health in terms of marketing?
That is another great question. I would say, so there's actually quite a few companies that I like what they're doing. I don't know how, once again, how far they can expand, but companies like Grow Health are really, really smart. Like they figured out what their audience is, which is, hey, let's make, healthcare like people need to go get, people sometimes just want very sort of transactional healthcare services, right? Like, hey, I want to get this drug. I want to get this prescription. I don't want to jump through a lot of hassle to get it, what have you. And so they figured out how to deliver that service in a very convenient, seamless, amazing way, right? And they've done that really, really well. They've sort of really identified this market that, is underserved or wasn't really being served, right? Was being sort of, shoehorned into the traditional healthcare sort of delivery and just didn't work. And they figured out a great way. The question that does become is as they scale and grow, which is, I think, a lot of problems that a lot of companies face as they scale and grow is like, how big is that market? How big can they grow? Like how much of the healthcare services are truly transactional in that nature? And as they expand into like more chronic diseases and what have you, I don't know how transactional that is and how well their model will continue to work, which means they may need to change things and what have you. But, I think there's been a lot of companies that have had success with that and breaking down and understanding where there's these transactional services that the traditional healthcare environment has not done a good job of delivering. I think there's still a lot of ground to be discovered there to make those services much more convenient for your average patient, average consumer.
Now we're somewhat depressingly somehow almost done with 2024 and gearing up for 2025, which I don't know about for you, but for me, it feels like this year has flown by. So if we think ahead to 2024 learnings and then 2025 plans, what are some top learnings from 2024? And then what are some of those big priorities for 2025?
Yeah, I think I will say like, it's pretty crazy. Like for me, I still think it's insane. Like COVID was 4 years ago, right? And COVID did a number on the healthcare industry. Like the healthcare industry is in some ways still very much recovering from sort of the systematic shock that took place then, right? There's a lot of things that have changed for the good in some ways, like telehealth now is much more, it's like ubiquitous, right? There's a lot of things that have made things a lot easier, but in some ways, healthcare is still a huge mess. 2024, I think, was the first year this year that things have somewhat gotten back to normal, back to where it used to be. It's like healthcare was not sort of in a reactionary mode in some ways, just trying to figure out how to survive. And so I am excited about that. I think people are looking in healthcare in 2025 about how things are going to help in digital healthcare in particular, because I think there was a lot of hype in digital health. And so there was a lot of money that came in. A lot of that money dried up in 2022 and 2023, and a lot of digital health companies went under or had to restructure or, get merged and consolidated and change their business models and all these types of things. And so 2024 has felt like, okay, things are finally settled a little bit. And with sort of obviously the pickup in AI, kind of going back to your point about how like AI is now being used as a buzzword for everything, I think they're now starting to realize, okay, we can't just call like, okay, great, everything is now AI enabled. So it basically is now meaningless, right? Saying that you have an AI enabled solution doesn't mean anything. It's now really getting back to like what I was saying about, okay, what problems are we really solving with this new tech? How are we actually delivering something that people will find useful, that will have benefit? And so that part is, I think, really exciting. The budgets are not nearly as tight as it was in 2024. I mean, it's still tight, don't get me wrong. Hospitals are always going to be, it's a low margin business at the end of the day for hospitals and for doctors in general. Healthcare, even though we spend a god awful amount of money on it as an industry, the margins are actually pretty low outside of pharma, med device, and a couple of, specialty, sort of sectors. It's not really high margins. And so I do think folks are now resettling and kind of understanding how to better leverage the technologies that are out there, the solutions that are out there, and how to actually fit it into their day-to-day workflow to make it something that is actually going to add value.
Final question here before we wrap. What's your number one piece of advice to medtech founders or medtech marketers as they gear up for 2025?
Yeah, I think one of the things with medtech in general and digital health and what have you, especially if you're not used to that industry, you're coming in from a different industry or what have you, is everything takes longer than you think it will, which I don't think is probably a new thing for a lot of folks, but healthcare just moves slowly in general. It's not that to say that there isn't a lot of enthusiasm or interest or what have you. It's just healthcare is a huge industry and it's really fragmented as well too. I think that's the other thing that people don't always fully understand, right? Because they might look at they're like, oh, well, here in the Bay Area, right? Like it's Stanford and UCSF. So if you get Stanford and UCSF on board, you think you should be good. Yeah, Stanford and UCSF are great here in the Bay Area. It means nothing in LA. It means nothing in New York. It means nothing in, Boise, Idaho, right? So like healthcare is very fragmented. It's very regional. Things take a long time to kind of get moving. And so that's the one thing I would say to anyone who's trying to make changes happen is definitely shoot for the moon, man. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's always good to be ambitious and aggressive and don't ever sort of cut your dream short, but just always be sort of take stock of the fact that, hey, if you're making progress and, you're not getting double-digit growth, you're getting, single-digit growth, like, hey, that's still growth. Take it. In this industry, it's a good sign. Be happy that you're growing. As long as you're growing, you're doing something right in healthcare.
Amazing. I love it. All right, man, we're going to wrap here. Before we do, for anyone listening in that wants to follow along with you, where should we send them?
Yeah, go to my LinkedIn profile. I mean, hopefully you can find me, Michael Chang, search Artera. You should be able to find me. Happy to connect with folks. Happy to help folks out if people have questions about healthcare, med tech, anything like that. Always willing to, I do definitely believe in karma, right? So if you do good things for other people, good things will happen to you. So, best of luck out there and looking forward to 2025.
Amazing. Thanks so much, man. Really appreciate it.
All right.
This episode of Category Visionaries is brought to you by Frontlines Media, Silicon Valley's leading podcast production studio. If you're a B2B founder looking for help launching and growing your own podcast, visit frontlines.io/podcast. And for the latest episode, search for Category Visionaries on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.